Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm super psyched to have these people up here because they have some real life experience in producing festivals and obviously integrating cannabis into festivals. I'm particularly excited, right? I spent a long time sort of permitting and doing the city side of festivals. I produced some of my own, and the paperwork is hefty, regardless of cannabis. And now we're adding a new component to it. And I guess this is a question for anyone who wants to answer it. Why is it important? Why would people in the industry, in the supply chain, care about this? And we will talk about AB 2020, because on September 26th, which was just really recently, we can do a whole shitload more in California than we could do it on September 25th. But it would be good to hear, why is it important on anybody?
Well, I think people are always smoking weed at concerts and festivals, and I think now that it's legal, there should be a way to sell it at events. There should be a way for people to sort of legally participate in that. There should be a varied offering for people who are going to festivals to, not just bring whatever they have, but, have the option of when they're at the festival, just like if they want to buy a drink, they want to buy a cocktail, buy a beer, that all those, options are available at festivals. So I think that's why it's important. It brings revenues for everybody, for events, for musicians, for artists, and for cannabis companies, of course.
I would like to add to that too is that, like, as we're kind of going through out of the shadows and into the light, like having cannabis at music festivals and concerts is how we reach a much larger demographic and a much larger population, and it becomes part of the conversation that this is normal and this is okay, right? So having cannabis in a very controlled environment and making sure it's available to people as a safer alternative to alcohol, because people are obviously all the statistics that show that cannabis is a lot safer than alcohol. It's just nice to have that as an alternative, right?
And I'll add, obviously in California, the state is still pretty, divided about whether or not, cannabis is good. The kind of the verdict is still out. And so, with so many jurisdictions, basically putting a ban, on commercial cannabis, I think that it really is a responsibility for us as event organizers and license holders to show people that, listen, we are regular business people just like anyone else. You can throw us into the gauntlet and give us a whole bunch of regulations that either don't make sense or are very difficult to comply with, but we're going to do what you want us to do. We're going to put on a safe event. We're going to make sure that everybody doesn't have any kind of big disasters or something that ends up on the headlines of USA Today, which would not be good for anyone. And so I think that it is important that they are formalizing a regulatory structure around it. And it's our job and our responsibility to make sure that we, do a good job following that and setting a good example so more and more events can happen, and then the regulations get more lax. So we can just be lighting up at a concert or, enjoying a joint at the Hollywood Bowl, on all that stuff. So it's tough, but it's important.
Yeah, and I would agree. For folks who are branding and for, in general, sort of to normalize, which is our favorite word, cannabis use in whatever capacity, whether it is smoking or other kinds of use, that the wider audience is available at events. And that's vital. And so for me, I think it's really important, and obviously we need to push those localities that are still in ban, which is quite a few in California, but this new law will allow a lot more flexibility. But before we go there, I wanted to sort of ask the lawyer on the panel to talk about, let's say it was September 25th and not September 26th, and there was no new law that allowed cannabis events other than what used to be allowed, which was only at agricultural district and county fairgrounds, correct? And
Yeah.
so we had some problems, didn't we? This industry had some problems and with consumption events, and I guess I'm gonna just keep trying to use that word as well, because what we're talking about here is consumption events. Events where you have a banner up and you give someone a flyer about cannabis isn't quite the same as a an event where you can actually look and feel and try. So tell us about Chalice.
Okay.
Does everybody know
sure.
what Chalice Cup is? Tell them what the...
Yeah, so Chalice Cup, it's, big Southern California festival. I think it was in San Bernardino, and it was supposed to, and they, Jocelyn, like you said, there was the law prior to all of Salva's hard work getting pushed through was very limited in terms of where you could have events with cannabis and especially cannabis and alcohol together at an event. And one of the exceptions was the county fairgrounds, and Chalice was actually supposed to happen at a county fairgrounds. So they had that set up, but what they didn't do was they didn't have the local authorities on their side. So they were in compliance with the state law. They didn't do the legwork locally, and I would say even going forward, that's a huge part of the new law. It's almost entirely locally controlled. So you want to be on it early with all the local officials, the entertainment commission, the whoever, the police department, the sheriffs if you're in a county land, and so whoever the appropriate authorities are, and the city council, the town council. And so what happened was the county board basically voted to not allow cannabis vending at the Chalice Cup. The whole point of Chalice is it's a contest. There's a cup. People win. There's judges. It's a cannabis event with a music concert, so yeah, it actually didn't happen. All the artists got their first half deposits. They didn't get paid the rest of their fees. They keep getting emails that, oh, we're trying to reschedule it and this and that, but more or less they lost a whole lot of money, and there's debt collectors trying to get deposits back from artists and things like that. It's all bad, and the festival didn't happen. None of the cannabis vendors were able to come and ply their trade. So yeah, you have to get on with the local authorities early, and if you don't know who the local authorities are, just start with a logical starting point and go from there, and you'll start to find that there's reams of regulations of paperwork and this and that, and this permit that you'll need and that permit you'll need, and every local area is different. But the good news is part of what pushed AB 2020 forward were local governments that wanted to have cannabis events in their areas. Like the city of Oakland was a big sponsor of it, so I think if you're in a cannabis-friendly jurisdiction, then there will be probably a clearer process laid out for that. And if you're not, like a lot of festivals are in pretty rural areas, you just got to get down and dirty, talk to the sheriffs early, start the planning early. The same thing happened with High Times Cannabis Cup that was also at the same fairgrounds, and the local council decided, hey, we don't want cannabis vending, and the concert went on, but there was no weed sales at a High Times event, which is kind of a tragedy in and of itself.
So, what do you want to add something to that?
Sure. So just to echo sort of what the difference between September 25th and 26th was, on September 25th, as you just stated, it was very strict and made only county fairgrounds you can have sales. But the way the law was written, it said it had to be a county fairground event. Now, I interpreted that, and my lovely attorney interpreted that as, if we got the county fairgrounds to say it's their event, then we can have it anywhere, right? So we were pushing the state to define that, right? So I was calling the Cow Palace. I'm like, hey, Cow Palace, want to do this thing on outside lands? And it could be grasslands presented by the Cow Palace. And that did not fly. So that I would say Chalice totally propelled AB 2020 forward. And as much as it was the cities for it, it was actually really the state and lawmakers who were against certain ones that helped pass it, because the way AB 2020 is written, it essentially gives control back to the state and to the local governments to say, hey, we don't want this here. Because they were getting notified of all these different, like the Secret Cup and all of these Oakland Smokeout every Sunday and all these like
The sesh was gone.
Exactly. And so the ability to, and this is so typical of government, but like their ability to say no was what essentially allowed them a process to create a process for them to say yes.
So since we keep bumping up against it, I'm going to ask you, since you were like the author, and if you guys haven't heard of it, we keep saying AB 2020. I wish it had a better name, like a sexier name, but whatever.
2020 is all right. It's 2020 is cool.
2020 is cool.
2020 vision, it's cool.
That went through the legislature this season, and the governor signed it. So it's a reality, and you were pretty much, it was yours, your baby.
That was my baby.
So tell them what it is.
Assemblymember Bill Quirk is the author. I sponsored it, paid for it, on behalf of everybody here. So
Paid for a law. I don't know what that means.
I just thought it was important, right? So I've been in this space for a really long time, and like there's certain issues that I get behind, and this one to me, and the normalization of this and cannabis in music was important to me. And so basically what it allows is simply, as we said, a framework for the state to basically issue event permits based on local government giving permission, right? So everything in cannabis, I don't care if it's cultivation, manufacturing, dispensary, distro, doesn't matter. Everything starts at the local level. And it's as much as like your real estate to your zoning, to then your city, and then your county, and then you just work your way up. And right now, as it sits, I don't think anyone in the state of California has a permitting process defined for cannabis sales at a local level, but that's the challenge for people like me between now and Jan 1, when this law comes into effect, is to kind of hustle along these local governments to define a process. So as soon as they define a process, then it just opens it up to where everybody can go and apply for these permits, assuming you're checking all the boxes. One thing I would like to note is, because as much as we're always like, oh yeah, we're gonna smoke a joint at these festivals. Well, California in general, I don't care where you are, like it's pretty much an anti-smoking state. So being creative on like what types of things you're gonna sell, what types of brands you're gonna push, and things like that is gonna become a much larger issue.
So the 21 and over thing is also an issue, is it not? And I don't want to leave Brooke out. Do you have anything to say about AB 2020 before I go into the weeds, as it were?
Well, I will jump on what you said about the 21 and over, because one of the biggest things that I think people don't really take into account as far as events go is the advertising. So you need to be very careful about how you are advertising your event, because again, not only can everyone be 20 or have to be 21 and up to go to the event, same advertising regulations apply to your event as they do for the retailers and distributors and everybody else. I think it's that weird number of like 71.4% or whatever it is that has to be proven to be over the age of 21 that you are targeting for advertisements. So anyways, that just triggered me on that. But yeah, for the other thing I would say for AB 2020 is just that, you know, and we'll use Chalice as the example, you have got to start on the local level and do not expect the state, if they say what you're doing is great and is interesting and can go ahead, is going to override your local jurisdiction. That's what Chalice kind of tried to do. They were like, well, the state said okay, like, you know, like Lori gave us the okay on it, but San Bernardino did not care. So like he was saying, you know, to that point is work with your city council members, get involved in your community. If you need to do some lobbying and policy work yourself, do it. Nobody else is going to be out there advocating for you. So, you know, like you said as well, is that this is new territory. There are no guidelines that these local jurisdictions have to decide if they're going to let you do it, how they're going to let you do it, and what the parameters are. So really get involved with your local community and let them know what you want and what you need to have a successful event, and really push them on an economic level. Events draw tourism. That brings money to a city, money to a county. And so let them know that you want to bring, economic prosperity to your local jurisdiction, and you want to do it in a way that is going to be beneficial to everybody. So just stay super plugged into your local jurisdictions is kind of what I guess my 2 cents would be.
So, specifically in 2020, it requires you to use a licensed retailer. Is this correct? To sell products, or a micro business. Okay. So how does that work? Like, does someone have a way to describe, like, how you would do that?
Well, it's actually not that different than alcohol. I mean, in the sense that if you're throwing an event, there needs to be somebody with a permit, with the liquor license, vending the alcohol at your event, and it's so that parallels that pretty closely with cannabis. It's somebody essentially with a cannabis license who can come in and vend. And then, potentially the deals that you can make as an event promoter could be, some sort of split of proceeds or just a flat fee for them to come in and do what they do. There could be, so I would say those are probably the two big ways you could do it, or some hybrid of that, where there's a fee and then there's some potential split on, gross or something like that. But
And maybe like in a actual example, I don't know if grasslands, which you should describe to the folks what that was, which was a component of outside lands in San Francisco, integrated lots of different brands. Yeah.
I mean,
If they were
Salwa
to,
went about as far as you could go without having a cannabis permit to do a legal cannabis activation at a festival. It was remarkable what
Thank
you did.
you.
So.
yeah,
I was very
'cause
proud of that.
I'm curious personally, and so like, how do you then integrate the sponsor brands that want to come in with the retailer? If the retailer doesn't carry those, how does that
So
work?
I'm in a unique position where I touch a ton of the supply chain. So you would need a retail license. So just understanding if you want to vend, you just either have to partner up with somebody or obtain a retail license somehow. But as far as Grassland specifically was concerned, I wanted it to be like the best cannabis has ever looked, right? Like I wanted it to be amazing. I wanted it to be something that you interacted with, that you
Was
felt.
anybody there?
That you,
Did anyone go in the audience?
yeah? Okay,
A
good.
few of you? Great.
So, for instance, I wanted it to be very interactive, and I wanted it to be something you can walk into, touch, and see. So, one of the things that we were the most proud of was the terpene wall. So, we had these walls that we had cannabis-derived terpenes infused into diffusers that taught you what terpenes were, and so you'd walk up to it and you'd pump this pump, and it would have the aromatics of these terpenes in front of you. And then next to it was a lemonade stand that had the same terpenes that were in there infused into the lemonade. And then that's just like one example of one of the things we had. We kind of had we had so many brands, especially because 2018 was such a hard year on everybody financially, and that was a really expensive event. My partners on it, between Flocana, Kiva, Lemonade, Cookies, Jetty, PAX, forgive me, Emerald Outpost, sorry, and a couple others. Off the top of my head, forgive me if I'm missing somebody, but it was just really great, and it was a labor of love, and we all were really committed to the education portion of it, because cannabis is never really we've never really been exposed to that type of population in one area. That's 200,000 people coming into Golden Gate Park. So, and it's like mainstream. So many people came through and they were like, they just have never seen or experienced it. They're like, oh, can I get high? What does this do? What does that do? I don't know. And so it was just neat.
Cool. You want to add something?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say it was pretty funny. I was telling the story. I was walking into Grasslands with a friend. He was about to spark up a joint, and they're like, "Oh wait, no smoking here." And it's like, basically people are smoking everywhere else in the festival, but there it was like, the reason was basically, hey, the regulations are that you're not allowed to vend cannabis. It was supposed, you're not supposed to mix cannabis and alcohol. You're not supposed to vend cannabis. So there were all these people, that were basically giving samples of their stuff that didn't have THC, there were, and you could order the real thing, and there was a guy basically right outside the festival with it in the car that was, delivery, or people could have it
No, we had a
delivered to their
delivery
hotel.
on site.
Yeah.
Like they had like we had iPads running and people could get it delivered off property.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean there's people getting deliveries right off the property, and I had a friend who was
Not right off the property. Don't get me in trouble here.
Don't say that out loud.
Well, I just mean, yeah, it was legal. What you did was legal, and it was innovative. So it deserves to be celebrated. And now you don't have to do all those crazy workarounds.
But could I just touch on
Yeah.
that? That is like the best example of like where we are in cannabis, where we have to be the A+ squeaky clean student, where everyone else is cheating and bending the rules. So it's like in grasslands, you please put your joint away, no one can see it. But everywhere else on the entire property, it was cool. It was just comes to show.
Well, I mean, I think that it also is like indicative, right, of that no one really knows where the lines are yet. And so I don't know how Rec and Park sort of handled this in general, and you're not supposed to smoke in Golden Gate Park at all. So the idea that everyone's like sparking up all over and then you could deliver somewhere in park property is also ridiculous. But what's good is that people don't know where the line is, so you can push a little, and you can push a little, and the line is moving, right? Brooke,
I'll jump
the
in
line
there.
keeps moving around on us.
Well,
so.
and so here's me being the narc of the day. Be very careful about that because there are so many gray areas, and the regulators, one, some of them don't even understand cannabis, right? And they're trying to enforce the stuff. But two, they are actively going to be figuring out what those lines are. And just be careful because you don't want to be the person that sets that line, because they will be looking for ways to make examples of people, to really clarifying what those lines are. So really make sure that you work with your legal team to make sure that you know how you want to mitigate your risk and how far you want to push it. I'm not saying don't push stuff. I'm saying choose wisely what you compromise on and what you push, and then maybe, don't push some of the gray areas that are more on like public safety, public health, and those type of things. But yeah, I think it is exciting because there are so many gray areas left, and I think a lot of this will be sorted out over the next 18 to 24 months, but mitigate your risk wisely is what I would say.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, before it was a massive gray area, obviously under medical, and Northern Nights, we did an activation a few years back, which I think was the first actual in California where it was a music festival that we actually had this whole thing called the Tree Lounge, and there that was a part of the festival, but you actually had to show your medical ID. You get in there and there's a bunch of dispensaries vending, and there were DJs in there and stuff. So, and that basically this year a festival couldn't do something like that until now that this bill is passed. You could get a permit to activate something like that, where there's a whole area of many, sponsors and vendors, all in the cannabis business. But the reason why you'd want to still have it in a separate area is because of the over 21. If your festival is, all ages, then you're supposed to have the cannabis stuff in an area where basically only people over 21 are going to be able to access that.
And they cannot bring a drink in there. Right. They have to ditch their drink.
Right. I mean, you can still vend alcohol at your festival and vend cannabis at your festival, but it just needs to be separated. Yeah.
Right. So I know we don't have anyone here from the ABC, but I think that those rules are going to get more clarity as well, because I think it's really important. I was wondering if you guys could talk about, instead of just festivals, like, to me, events are also like cannabis in the yoga studio or cannabis in the art opening, or something with inside a four walls space, and how does this impact 2020 impact that?
You can get a special event permit for that too.
Yeah, it's the same.
But I think for just like a yoga class, I imagine the permit, it could get pretty expensive to do that for a yoga class.
So it would be a very big pain in the butt. Yeah. But AB 2020 isn't perfect. There's a lot of things that I would like to have it have had it different, but I wanted to get something done. One of the major flaws in something like that is I believe you're like limited to like, what is it? Like, I love that I'm asking you guys, but like somewhere between 10 to 15 permits per year per company. So you like, if you're going to have a yoga studio, I'm assuming you're going to have it all the time. So you would have to really strategically pick which events you would do, maybe once a month you do that or something like that. But the paperwork associated with it is time consuming and expensive.
The state paperwork?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the annual licenses, there's two different event ones that you can get. If you're going to do more than 10 events per year, your license fee, I think, is $15,000. So that's just to get the state approval to do it. That's not even.
But keep in mind, you still need the retail
Yep,
aspect of
and
it.
you still need, and I think that, I think another interesting point for the events too, when you're talking about yoga studios and things like that is really deciding, is this going to be a private event, right? Because then I don't need a license if it's a private event. Or is this going to be something that I'm marketing and that I'm actually actively sending out invitations to? And that's where you want to be really careful and make sure you do have all the appropriate, paperwork. But there is there are options, whether you do a private event, it's your thing, it's on your site, it's your friends coming, or if it's, a whole other thing. And then you got to get into the system and all that paperwork.
But just, this is a question, for a special event permit, do you need a state license? You just need a license, you just need to bring in a vendor that's licensed by the state, right? But the special event would be licensed locally, or do you also need?
You have to get local and state.
A state
And then
license
for the
special
vendors.
event and local.
You have to notify the state 60 days in advance what retail vendors will be there selling cannabis. So that's also something to think about when you are planning your events. This isn't something that you can throw together at the last minute. There are a lot of timelines set up that prevent you from doing last minute events, no matter how important or interesting or exciting that might be. Unfortunately, that's
true.
just kind of the state of where we're at.
It is something, I think, though, that one thing the law does give, which was pretty successful, I think, that you had there, was that local jurisdictions have a lot of freedom in how they permit these events. So, say the city of Oakland could have, they can set up different types of permits, some that might be for smaller events that might be easier to get and more inexpensive, and for massive music festivals. Like one of the examples Oakland the city actually brought up in lobbying for this bill was having a downtown art festival, outdoors in the streets, and being able to have cannabis vendors there too. And so I think for situations like that, I imagine the permitting process will be extreme. But if as local governments sink their teeth into it, hopefully for smaller events, they'll have an easier structure that'll make it simpler for operators.
Right. I live in Palm Springs, and I was able to get them to jump on the 2020 bandwagon. So that, as a city, we're super supportive, and
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other cities in the Coachella Valley that are super embracing of the cannabis industry. But my sense is that if a city has a decent process and the city is supportive, maybe this is just something, I don't know if 2020 allows a city to be the event sponsor or get an event license in some way. But there would be, and so in San Francisco, because I set up the event process, right, in San Francisco for the most part of anything outside of a park, there's a really robust and not super complicated process of event licensing and permitting anyway. So this add-on of cannabis should be really simple as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, it may be a conversation with law enforcement more than anything else. And then if the city's supportive, I guess they'd have to iron out something and make the state say maybe a blanket or something, because $15,000 seems really excessive.
It is excessive.
That seems, and I don't see how it's even like supportable from the standpoint of the way fees are charged in government. Typically, you have to say it's like a cost recovery. You can't make money from fees. You're supposed to just cover the costs of managing the program. $15,000 is a suspect number, if you ask me.
That's for unlimited, if for an entity that wants to do unlimited events, more than 10.
5,000 if you're going to do less.
You have to talk into that microphone, my dear.
I'm so loud, I forgot. Yeah, I think the fee for, if you're doing less than 10 events, is 5,000. So that's also something to think. Do you want to toe the line and cut it off at 9? Or are you going to be throwing, 10 or more, then you might want to throw 30 in the year, to make your money back or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you're a regular event promoter, it might just be not that much, really, at the end of the day.
But what sucks about it is that now we're excluding people, right? So we've
Absolutely.
just successfully excluded a bunch of the little guys from participating and becoming like a concessionaire of cannabis, which was not
Right.
the intent.
I mean, the fees could actually change, right? They're like the BCC
The fees can
could
change, but it's like the structure of which you have to navigate local and state law to pull a simple permit and how far ahead you have to plan with a 30-day window than the 60-day window, that is expensive, just period.
Right. So it's likely, just like everything else, someone will see this as a niche and decide to help people for a little bit of money. Because navigating government is easier for some of us than others. I was a bureaucrat for a long time, and it doesn't scare me. I was wondering if we could talk about sampling or samples for a second. And maybe this is moot now that 2020 is past, but I know this was an issue before, and like people, when they're branding their product, they give away like Kind bars. That was like a big thing, right? Pop chips. Remember when everyone had a pop chip? What's the deal with sampling and cannabis?
Well, this was this year, so this is totally illegal, but one of the festivals I worked with had
The lawyer's going to tell you what's illegal.
ended up having it just sort of was a free. There were vendors who just came in and gave away like 1,000 joints, and it was crazy. It was kind of funny. I feel like because they had all the sheriffs, the county, the people, everybody on their side, so they could do it, which tells you a lot about how you need to operate in general. Is you just need to have the buy-in from your local people, and you'll have a lot more leeway. With sampling, I don't think it's illegal to do.
No
under
samples.
AB 2020.
No
even?
samples,
Even at events?
even at events.
That can't be varied locally?
You can have non-medicated samples, which we had at Grasslands, like
Right.
Kiva, just launched a billion different flavors and was giving out a zillion samples.
But
of edibles
couldn't-
without.
mints,
couldn't a
but
local- a
no, yeah,
local
there has to be
authority
money
permit
exchanged
that?
for it. It could be $1.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be anything crazy, but
Right.
Keep in mind, the state wants their tax revenue,
Yeah.
which is why there's no samples. So if you want to give out a sample, you've got to be remitting the taxes for, even if you
Well,
charge
that's
$1
true.
or a penny.
The
And I will
tax issues are
say
separate.
this as a word of caution, because we saw this happen in Colorado, and I don't want to see anyone in California get in trouble for this. As an individual, you are still tied to your company. So it is not a good idea to bring a backpack full of your own personal cannabis goods that your, store or whatever has, and then give those out. I can guarantee you, there are people at the festival that are dressed in normal clothes that are police or that are, whatever. And so if you think, oh, it's just me as Brooke, it's really not tied to, Brooks Buds, my dispensary. No, your name is on your license application. They are going to trace it back and you will get nailed. So be smart about how you
Yeah.
do it. And I think, this is a big issue that we are still lobbying for. Obviously, no samples in a supply chain and no samples at events is crazy. But I think that's where we as an industry really have to keep voicing our concerns to the local authorities and more importantly to the state until they actually do something about this.
I'm going to pivot off that point, though. So what's interesting is moving forward, right? The future of what this ends up looking like. So these festivals, they get most of their revenue not off of the tickets, because that typically pays for artists. They make most of their money off of concessions and other things. So as cannabis becomes part of music festivals, they're going to look as that as another revenue source, right? So the way our models of I could just be a pop-up dispensary. No, because the taxes, the fees are all still there, plus the promoter is going to get a massive cut and so on and so forth. But what's interesting about it is that as you're going into festivals now and they're checking your bags for alcohol, it's in the very near future that they're going to start looking for cannabis too, whereas now they kind of don't.
Interesting.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so I did okay, didn't I, on the fly? And I didn't even use the F word one time. We have like 15 minutes left. Questions? Happy to take questions. I don't care. Man in the suit. You all told me your names, and it went like whoop, and that's the end of that. Loud.
So I would say, I think that as we move forward on public consumption, that is a very big, important thing to take into account. And so I think what you're going to see, and I don't know, this is all speculation, right? But I think you're going to see, events and festivals or even concert venues have like, the designated smoking areas. And then it's like tobacco and cannabis would be together. Or like you said, if you're in a yoga studio, like maybe they have to go out back and it's like 95 feet from the door or whatever it is. But then that would technically be illegal, I guess, if you're on the street. So, yeah, I think a lot of this still has to get worked out, but I guess that's where, topicals, edibles, and, even maybe vape pens, become,
Vape is considered smoking.
I know. I got nailed for that actually at Red Rocks Tuesday night. I was vaping at Red Rocks on Tuesday, and they were like, ma'am, no smoking. And I was like, but it's a vape pen. And they were like, it's still smoke. And I was like, oh. So,
Yeah, that's a really good question. It definitely would have to be something without smoke unless, you have an area where you can do that.
With the technology of edibles these days, it's going to be instant. Like, before we know it, you're going to eat it and you're going to feel it by the time you finish the sentence.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I think that we're going to get to a place where smoking a blunt is not a thing anymore.
No, it will always be a thing. Don't say that. You can't say that.
Tears are being shed right now.
You had a question, sir?
Yeah, what was the takeaway at Grasslands for the brands that did activate? We're topical companies, so we have a CBD and a THC line.
Or like your company.
So we show up and do events all day long. We're like, how do you do that? Because the products are identical. We just show up with unmedicated products.
So this year will never happen again, right? Like, so it was just like my pilot year, and I was trying to time AB 2020 with Grasslands, but like I obviously missed it by a month or two, but tried. But ultimately, like, we did this because we wanted to have a larger experience moving forward. Sorry, I got sidetracked. What was the question? Sorry.
What was the takeaway for the brands?
Oh, the brands. That's right. So the positives were reaching the mass market, and the positives were becoming the Heinekens of our space. Like, they realized that investing in having their brand and having that many eyeballs on their brand, being associated with an event that, like, you're bonding with your friends, and it just becomes this like monumental thing. That's how you get a different type of penetration into a mainstream market that we're not used to. Again, like, just nothing that I've been to in cannabis, and I've been to a lot of shit in cannabis, had that amount of people there ever. Like, 200,000 people attend Outside Lands every year, breaking up like 70-ish plus thousand each day. I think Kiva told me she had like 26,000 people go through her booth alone. Christy had like a line out of her little Kiva house thing the entire time.
That booth was really pretty good. I was surprised because they just had every flavor of their, of mints and chocolate covered blueberries and all that stuff. Obviously not, no THC, but people still like free chocolate covered blueberries.
But honestly,
and mints,
I think the main
so
thing
she was
is
pretty successful with that.
the main investment, and then these things are really expensive to go to stuff like this. It's literally, you're trying to become Heineken.
Right, and I think the other thing is like that there are so many people. We work in this space, right? And so we talk about cannabis all day long. There's so many people that never get near it, never say the word, are terrified, and certainly certain demographics more than others. So something where it's just anyone can wander in, and I'm assuming, I mean, Outside Lands is all ages, so you must have done there was carding, right?
Yeah, so what we had to do, just to be respectful of the law, so again, we had to show them that we're the good actor, we're on our best behavior. I begged all the brands to be super cool and don't do anything that would get any of us in trouble, because we all understand it's like a long-term objective. But what we did was Grasslands was on the perimeter of Outside Lands, and so effectively we were carved out of the ABC permit. So then that way the entire festival is essentially covered under the ABC permit, except for like certain islands. And in those islands, they're roped off. We had volunteers throughout the festival making sure that people didn't smoke in Grasslands. But, and then also ditch their drink at the door, because ultimately what I was trying to do, even though I didn't need to do that, is effectively train the public, because that's what it's going to be the next year and the following year and whatever. So we had to like set that precedent of like, this is the way this is going to be moving forward until we change the laws.
That's cool. Okay. Sir?
So scaling down a whole lot, I'm on the board of the Oakland Senior Cannabis Club.
Tokeland's Senior Cannabis Club. I like the sound of that.
We've been meeting for 3 years on private property. We're an open, inclusive group of seniors that get together for themed potluck. Right? And
A potluck.
people come to get lucky with pot as well.
I love it.
So we treat it as though it's another dish.
What kind of lucky are we talking about here?
So people donate and people share cannabis in the venue at the event. Since it's a potluck, there are people that bring alcohol.
Yeah.
Right? We also
Are you selling the alcohol?
no selling. I mean, it's just like donation to a potluck. Some people bring dishes, some people bring beer, some people bring pot. Right?
So is there a question there?
I just wanted to know how much we're going to get in trouble.
Are you inviting, are you inviting like members of the public, or is it just,
We have a Facebook page
Okay.
that announces this monthly event, and we announce the theme, and we invite people.
Yeah,
we
that's a
have
public.
yeah, so again, it's if you made it a private event where it's like, hey, my members, this is just us getting together at my friend's house, smoking, bringing some booze, whatever it is, private event, you don't need a permit. If you're inviting it to the public and you're marketing it in a public forum, then that was when you get shoved into the temporary permit.
The event, we're not marketing the cannabis.
Yeah.
It's,
No
yeah.
sale on site, but there are sponsors who come
So
and set up a dab bar.
where is the venue? Is it a public venue? Is it a?
Private property.
It's on private property. You're walking a line, I guess. That I
I'm
would
gonna give you
say.
naughty advice. I would ride that till the wheels fall off. I wouldn't worry about it. Just keep going. It's cool.
I feel like you'll be fine with that. I mean, if you wanted to be extra cautious, instead of
Right.
a Facebook
Close your
page,
Facebook
make it a Facebook group that people have to join.
Right.
That way it's
Close
like a
it.
private
If you
group.
make it a Facebook group, a group doesn't really have a size limitation, so it wouldn't really change anything, except it would make it that members have to join the group. And then in the highly, highly unlikely event that anybody would ask, it would be, hey, it's a private group. You have to be a member to join. And
Right.
that's what, so.
Right.
And I think that, again, at the end of the day, what do the regulators want? They want their money. So if you have sponsors, right, or vendors that are coming, I would, make sure that they have manifested into the track and trace system, which is coming very soon, unfortunately, for everybody. The amount of cannabis that they're bringing, make sure they're remitting their own taxes, even if it's free to you guys. Maybe they're paying a penny for it. But I think that's what they're going to care most about is diversion of product and am I getting my tax money at the end of the day for now? Because they don't know. Like you said, there's so many loopholes. And, this is where it gets kind of fun. You can be creative. It's kind of like problem solving, or playing Tetris all day. It's like, what pieces do I need to move around to make this a private event? Or what do I need to do? And so,
I wouldn't. I feel like this is extremely low risk for you.
worry about it.
Well, that's from a.
That's my legal advice.
That's a
there.
lawyer. I would also say that your demographic. I mean, obviously, you're reaching people who may have been doing this for a while in their lives, but spread out and bring more people into your group so they're able to really experience this. I took my mother to a dispensary for the first time. It was hysterical. And she just was so nervous, and the CBD product she left with, like, didn't do anything for her because it's a process, right, of testing, and just panicked, as an 80-year-old. So more seniors need more exposure, if nothing else. So maybe not dabbing right away, probably. Ease it, right? Go slow, go low. Any other questions? How are we doing? No? Well, we'll just chatter away up here. I know that this is sort of like alcohol, and people sort of tend to say, well, it's like the same, right? We're doing recreational, so it's your choice. You had people coming into Grasslands, and I know they weren't using, but like already hammered at Outside Lands.
100%.
They make really good drinks at Outside Lands. Like, how do you manage those things together? Do you guys have a response to that? And maybe it's like a little off topic.
How do you manage like people? So my idea for sort of how cannabis integrates into concerts and venues, as far as being able to provide an offering that will make sense, is again really honing in on edibles that like just hit you really fast. Because the worst thing would be somebody takes something, they're like, it doesn't work, and then they take another one, they're like, it still doesn't work. All right, I'm gonna go get a cocktail, and the next thing you know, you're on the floor. That's where I get nervous. So it's just a matter of, if we end up selling, it has to be something that like essentially people are able to dose themselves like and feel it immediately.
Is there any other, like, we just had a really big event. There were 700 people at our non-consumption event in the city of Coachella for our association. And it was amazing. Only one person went over that edge of taking a few hits off of whatever and then having had alcohol and just lost his shit. But 1 out of 700 was pretty good odds. And I think that that's a reality, because I don't think they mix well. Obviously, people can manage their own consumption of whatever they're using, but sometimes that something just, you're done, you hit it. So is there any experience, is there any training around employees? Is there any way to manage that? Because I feel like one of those reasons we might get in a newspaper is because that will transport to a hospital at some point.
I spent a lot of time thinking about this, because as I'm sort of building my little event company, I'm always like sort of in the back of my mind, like, why would I have an opportunity to vend cannabis versus the BBC, who would just like move over to cannabis and sell it? And what I believe is that, because of my experience of operating a dispensary and like having bud tenders, there's like a runway. You can't just hire a kid that pours beer into a cup to hand it over to you. People have questions, they need to know stuff, and so effectively what will still be bud tenders need to be trained and educated, because and they've got to do it fast too, because when you're serving that amount of people, you're gonna have to be like, hit it once, wait 15 minutes, this is this end, this is that end, like whatever it ends up being. Just have a sip, wait a little, like 2 minutes or whatever. So the staff that are going to be at these concerts and venues have to be educated. And that's the difference. And that, I believe, is the opportunity for people in cannabis to shift into this versus people in alcohol to shift into this.
Anyone else have any experience with staff training? Because I think that's a huge space that's empty right now. If you're serving alcohol, the ABC has a lead training for alcohol service, and there's a lot of experience, right? What does over service look like? What's somebody inebriated look like? Blah, blah, blah. There isn't that in cannabis at all, and the BCC is not saying that it's required, nothing.
So there is a company, there's a couple of companies that have started pilot programs like that. One of them is called Cannabis Trainers, super easy to remember. They're training people on cannabis. But I do think it is really important. I mean, again, as an industry, like, we're at the forefront of something that's never been done before. Not only is our industry figuring out, but the public and the consumers are figuring it out. And so if you're an edibles manufacturer, maybe at the station where they're you know, handing out the edibles or selling the edibles or whatever it is, you have like a little information sheet that tells them, you know, what they can expect, and something that says, hey, less is more, you know, if you're starting out. How about not eat 100 milligrams first, but like start small and see what happens. I've seen a lot of that in other states that have been very helpful. And actually in Colorado, I think it was actually one of the anti-cannabis lobby groups that actually started passing them out, and it ended up being very beneficial actually for the industry and the consumers. And so unfortunately,
Thanks for that.
yeah, you know, it's like, oh great, you're helping us out. But I think, you know, unfortunately the truth of the matter is that it's in our hands and in our responsibility to do this right now. And even though that might be, you know, a pain that you can't just have people passing it out and assume that everybody understands what an edible will do to them, you know, educating people on our products and cannabis, you know, and its effects on your body are really going to help move the ball forward on this. Again, you know, there's still so many naysayers out there, but the more that we do to prove to them, hey, people aren't dying, people aren't jumping off of roofs, you know, because they got too high or whatever it is, the faster and further along, you know, this whole movement will go. And, you know, at the end of the day, there's still people in this country that are going to jail for cannabis. And part of the way that we stop that is by educating consumers and making sure that everybody's safe.
And normalizing it.
Yeah, and normalizing it. You know, the stigma
So-
has to go away.
Did you have in Grasslands a beverage, a THC, or, I mean, not in
So-
Grasslands, was there a beverage? I think that the beverage space is where we're gonna see the integration more in festivals and events
agree.
than in smokables even, or edibles. I think the beverage space is exploding, and so I wonder if you had CBD.
So we had Hi-Fi Lo-Fi, which is a brand that was collaborated on with Canacraft and Lagunitas was there, and they were pouring samples. And then also lemonade with the cannabis terpenes infused in it were sold. And I agree with you. Actually, I'm working on a project with cookies right now to develop a soda line. And yeah, absolutely.
Right. I think that makes the most sense. So I think we have a minute. I want to thank you guys so much for staying. And I hope this was interesting for you, and give them a hand.